predatory MTX wasn't removed as a favor to the players. It was a calculated, experienced decision, intended to make Jagex millions.
I have no faith in this game. They're trying to milk it for what it's worth.
So many people complaining about this update.
RuneScape 3 is at its lowest player count in history.
The narrative being spun is one of a moral awakening, a company finally choosing its players over its pockets. We're told that the removal of Treasure Hunter is a financial risk, but CVC, who currently owns Jagex, is an investment firm whose primary goal is to flip the company for massive profit in the next few years. And in the world of private equity, decreasing profits isn't really considered a good investment.
We promise to make major changes to secure the long-term future of RuneScape. Our approach to MTX has slowly eroded the integrity of RuneScape.
So what is going on here? Though I can appreciate the fantastic move to remove predatory MTX, the players of RuneScape, myself included, are coming from a decade where keys and spins on the wheel tore the game apart like a virus. For years, Jagex's official responses to the community, and occasionally the UK government, has contradicted the raw data we can see on paper. There's always been this understanding that when it comes to Treasure Hunter, any good news comes with a catch. The players want the game to thrive, so the topic of corporate greed is a naturally touchy subject. But greed wouldn't have shut down Treasure Hunter. To dismiss this move as too good to be true isn't just skepticism, it's a necessary critique of Jagex's history.
Our MTX approach is harming RuneScape, and it's time that we took action.
When Treasure Hunter was removed, the CEO recognized the harm that MTX poses to the game. But this wasn't the first time a Jagex CEO trashed their own monetization model. Back in 2009, Mod MMG said that MTX is a slow death that devalues any game. This is, by the way, the same CEO that introduced MTX to RuneScape in the first place. Now, we have two leaders at opposite ends of the MTX era, both admitting the same harm. After 14 years of aggressive promotions, the investors looking to make back their £910 million investment are suddenly comfortable cutting millions from their annual income. Something doesn't add up here. I want to find out what this move actually means. How much money are Jagex actually losing? And is it really the risk they claim it to be? Every year, Jagex is legally bound to file a financial report. To the government, it's a standard disclosure of where the money is going. To the RuneScape players, we can view this as a professional book of confessions. Every membership purchase, every key bought on Treasure Hunter, every piece of merchandise is tracked in these files, dating back to Jagex's founding in 2001. When you compare these reports side by side, the story of greed we associate Treasure Hunter with suddenly gets more chapters. Reviewing Jagex's financials can be a number-heavy grind, but we can simplify it by looking at two factors: the revenue and the bank. Revenue is the money Jagex makes in a year. It pays the salaries, the servers, the office rent, and so on. Whatever money remains after that is sent to the bank as the company's savings. In March 2010, Jagex reported a revenue of £44.5 million, which after expenses held £24 million in the bank. Enough to fund the entire company's operations for 9 months. That's a lot of money just sitting there. The MTX nightmare didn't start with a boardroom meeting about greed. It started with a massive hole in Jagex's financial armor. The creators of RuneScape were starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. Historically, the Gowers always intended on creating a game, not run a business with hundreds of employees. And after a decade of Jagex getting more corporate, they prepared to distribute their responsibilities and take their largest payday yet: £22 million from the company's savings. This was distributed amongst the people with shares in the company, 55% of which belonged to the two Gower brothers alone. A compensation for their creation, but a move that left the bank account with a sizable dent, unprepared for what was to come. In the middle of 2011, 35% of the board was controlled by Inside Venture Partners, IVP for short, a private equity firm that had been quietly holding shares since 2005. As the Gowers were looking to phase out, IVP were looking to expand into ownership. A deal was struck. £75 million for the shares, plus a $7.7 million exit fee. But while IVP paid for the shares, they had no intention of covering the exit fee. Instead, they sent that bill to Jagex, forcing the company to essentially participate in paying for their own sale. This shift in power made Jagex align its reporting with IVP's calendars, moving the financial year from March to December. This meant the 2011 report only covered 9 months, making the profits appear smaller than they actually were. They reported $32.9 million in revenue, a healthy number on paper, but the profit margin was barely peaking above water. At the very top, Jagex was being run into the ground. Paying for the Gowers' exit fee was not the only weight pulling them down. During those 9 months, Jagex had hired an additional 90 staff members, driving annual operations to $27.8 million. This expansion required a larger office, just as the board decided to pull the plug on the Spacescape MMO Stellar Dawn and a failed US expansion. Combined, the price tag of this was £14.8 million. The savings were gone. Jagex was now head below water, £615,000 in debt, with $7.9 million in bills to be paid within a year. IVP had essentially paid £75 million for a failing company that owed $8.5 million it didn't have. This is where the calculated magic of company finances happen. At this very moment, Jagex didn't have a single pound to their name, but legally they weren't bankrupt yet. Their last resort was $6.9 million in unclaimed funds. This was money sitting in the bank from players who had prepaid for 6 or 12-month memberships. Because their customers were time-restricted from receiving what they paid for, Jagex couldn't technically spend it. But it worked as a guarantee to show the government that the company wasn't done for if they could keep providing a game to play. In addition to a proven monthly income of $3.6 million, Jagex was living entirely on the promise of money in the future. The managers were scrambling to save the company, and IVP wanted their $75 million investment back. As the fireworks celebrated the start of 2012, Jagex were willing to pull the emergency brakes to not crash and burn.
Yo, this is Mountaineer, and as you can see, you can now buy spins on the Squeal of Fortune.
You can now buy Squeal of Fortune spins, and I'm completely against the update.
Jagex are just disgustingly hungry for money and letting people pay for spins.
The introduction of the Squeal of Fortune came with a grim understanding. It would poison the game's reputation and heritage. But at the verge of bankruptcy, it had to be done as a necessary evil. Without it, there'd simply be no RuneScape. Now, as players looking through this lens, as consumers and not business people, we have to talk about integrity and what that means to each individual player. Some years after the Squeal, the former product manager of old-school RuneScape, ModMattK, conducted extensive research into this very question. Research intended to prove to the managers that adding MTX would cause a mass exodus and kill the game. He tells this story about adult players faced with a lie. That old school is dying, and the only way to save it is through the addition of MTX. In tears, these players said they would rather see the game die than to have its integrity compromised. It does raise a haunting question. Was the survival of the game worth the cost of its soul? MMG tried defending the Squeal, but twisting statistics was unfortunately not uncommon for this administration. He claimed that using your free daily spins equaled a stamp of approval, arguing that 90% of players were happy with the Squeal of Fortune. In reality, following a UK Parliament hearing in 2019, the number of people buying any form of MTX was actually closer to 10%. Internally, the tone was different. Some members of staff was heavily against it. Paul Gower quit the company in protest. On the other end, the staff members tasked with saving the company recognized the riots when faced with future investors.
So we came up with this guy with our first version of kind of gacha or loot crates. He's called Yelps, and he was the kind of face of what we called the squeal of fortune. This was a controversial choice, necessary from a business point of view, but players did not like Yelps. So this led to riots on World 66.
In 2014, the Squeal of Fortune became Treasure Hunter, a professional attempt to scrub the gambling association and wipe the slate clean. It was a gamble that worked. Key sales were notably higher compared to the old spins, but the internal sentiment towards MTX is harder to track. In 2019, the executive producer, Mod Warden, acknowledged the community's distaste but doubled down, calling it a necessary evil for survival. 1 month prior, Jagex's testimony to the UK Parliament told a different story of omission. They leaned heavily on cosmetics to explain their revenue, carefully avoiding any mention of Treasure Hunter's gambling mechanics. They also admitted the average player age was 22, while data from 2020 showed the average account age was 9.2 years. Without a calculator open, you can tell that if the average player was only 22 in 2019, they were only 15 when these gambling mechanics were introduced in 2012. It wasn't illegal, so it makes you wonder, did Jagex avoid saying that out of shame or simply to dodge a PR nightmare? But back in 2012, MTX did save the company. Without it, Jagex was projected to spiral another 8 million in debt and face total bankruptcy. And by 2013, after the evolution of combat cost them 25% of the player base, the board decided the game's integrity was secondary to its profit. Mod MMG was replaced by an IVP plant, Rod Cossins. To Rod, player sentiment wasn't a concern. He came in with a single objective: patch the ship up and have it ready for sale. What followed was a calculated, economic iron fist. He cut the staff from 515 to 307 in just 4 years. Content quality plummeted, replaced by patch weeks and repeatable events like The Beach and Vic the Trader. Through these brutal cutbacks, Rod saved the company millions. By 2015, the year-end profit actually outperformed the MTX revenue. But finally being able to stay afloat without MTX didn't give Rod a reason to care about the gameplay experience. To him, this was purely about money. In 2016, Rod, together with a small team that included strategy specialist John Bellamy, facilitated a $300 million sale to a Chinese mining company, Shandong Hongda. From Shandong's perspective, their purchase was financed on a lie. This company was failing. The $300 million to buy Jagex had been borrowed from a corrupt asset management firm whose chairman was later sentenced to death for bribery and embezzlement. They secured a loan on a promise that Jagex itself would pay it back. To hide from their reputation as a failing mining business, they rebranded as Fukong Interactive, repackaging the company as a modern tech firm. And using the same strategy of promising unrealized revenue, they secured massive loans to acquire other companies. A strategy that led to 57 lawsuits and a $1.2 billion debt. Unfortunately, Jagex was the only company in their entire repertoire that had any profits at all, totaling 99.45% of Fukong's entire annual income. Every single pound that could be legally extracted from Jagex was taken. During their 4-year ownership from 2016 to 2020, Jagex profited $163.7 million. Money that would have been great for developing new content if it wasn't for Fukong extracting, hold on for this, $186.7 million, digging deep into Jagex's remaining savings. As bankruptcy usually goes, the government started seizing Fukong's assets to put them up for auction. Fukong, desperate to keep their money cow, hid Jagex as a giveaway trade to a US shell company, confusing a poor buyer who'd later take Jagex to court after claiming they'd won the company in an auction somewhere. This mess wasn't settled until December 2022, when the case was quietly terminated in court.
Was there any internal pressure to try and monetize Old School?
Absolutely. I've had conversations with people who have demanded that it goes in. We did lots of customer interviews, focus groups. We came out with a clear opinion that the only time that MTX should go into game is if the game is going to die and we're sure of it. This game is a growth game. This game is going to remain a growth game. It's going to continue growing from a revenue point of view if we do the right things. This is the evidence to say that you should not put MTX into Old School.
Carlyle's approach to profit was long-term stability over short-time extraction. 2021 marked a turning point. For the first time in years, subscription profits alone outperformed MTX. But this time, there was no parent company taking all the profit away from them. Much of this success was driven by Old School RuneScape, which during the same year pushed Jagex to an all-time subscriber record. The study Mod Matt K had conducted some years prior was now a proven business model. The most successful product in the company's history was the one that refused to compromise its integrity. Even the greedy owners of the past agreed the best way of making profit was to keep the gambling out. There was, however, one final problem. Despite the consensus to keep Old School clean, money remained a powerful motivator for the directors. In 2021, the 5 members of the board took home a $12.8 million payday split between them. By comparison, the remaining 469 staff members shared $22.9 million. The staff on the floor felt this massive financial incentivizer was holding the company back, with leadership focusing on heavy monetization instead of sustainable growth. Something changed when Carlyle eventually sold Jagex to CVC Capital Partners for £910 million. A deal made by a team that included a familiar face, an advisor, John Bellamy. John had extensive experience with Jagex. Not only did he help with the Fukong sale in 2016 and worked closely with the ex-Jagex CEO Rod Cousins for years at a different company, but he was also an avid Old School player who believed in the message of the study Matt Kay had conducted some years prior. When CVC put him on the board of directors and cleared out the old guard, the removal of Treasure Hunter hit the board's agenda for the very first time. As John became the CEO in 2025, his objective was clear: make Jagex look like a profitable, healthy company for the next buyer. CVC isn't here to run a game studio. They're here to flip Jagex for massive profit.
The priority for RuneScape 3 must be long-term health and sustainability. I believe it deserves another 20 years for sustainable, healthy existence, defined by the same qualities that have driven much of Old School RuneScape's success. Community obsession, authenticity and clarity of identity, reverence for the game's DNA, and perhaps most importantly, economic integrity.
Money is king. And as this journey through the Book of Confessions has taught us, removing Treasure Hunter was a strategic decision to achieve record-setting profits. CVC intends on selling Jagex in just a few years, and they know a declining controversial revenue stream is no way to reach a $2 billion valuation. With this history in mind, there are 2 reasons that point towards why removing a $1 million predatory MTX model was the only viable path forward. The first is the Old School model. As John said, and as the players were quick to point out during the first days of the year, Jagex are slowly aligning RuneScape 3 with its more successful sibling. They're implementing the very factors they believe sent membership revenue to record highs. The data estimates they can do this without suffering a financial loss. In 2016, MTX was a money-grabbing titan, contributing 36% of total revenue. In 2024, that number had withered to just 19.5%. Even that figure hides the true weakness of Treasure Hunter, as it includes bonds and cosmetics. The report in 2023 even specifically calls out the lack of interest in buying keys, noting a 9 million drop over the course of 2 years. Based on data from the previous 3 years, we can estimate that new subscriptions alone will fully cover the lost MTX revenue by December 2026. And that is before you factor in the recent membership price increase. The risk the Jagex CEO is preaching is real for RuneScape 3. That specific product will likely see a drop in its individual revenue until the road to restoration gains traction. But for the company as a whole, removing MTX at the start of their financial year will be completely hidden under the record-setting profits they will report at the end of it. The second reason is the law. While experts in the field were quick to call treasure hunter gambling, the UK government originally chose to let companies self-regulate and protect vulnerable players. The companies, of course, didn't. And now, in 2026, the government officials will no longer hand out second chances. Starting in May of 2026, the UK Advertising Standards Authority will already be cracking down on lootbox transparency, demanding games brand themselves with their gambling inclusions. In June, lootbox games will automatically be hit with an age limit of 16, 18 if the games include drugs and violence, which RuneScape does. The European Commission is following suit with the Digital Fairness Act, set for proposal in late 2026, banning loot boxes in games that don't include age verification. Though its implementation is not confirmed, but is highly likely, its eventual introduction would be at its earliest in late 2027. In a world where Treasure Hunter provided an unignorable amount of profit, Jagex could have squeezed it for at least another 2 years. Removing it now, instead of extracting profits for a little longer, achieves 2 things. First, good PR by removing a gambling element, making the company look favorable in the worldwide media. But it also gives them a chance to replace that unclean, decreasing money income with a proven player growth model now, rather than in the middle of a billion-dollar sale later. The overwhelming evidence, based on the company's history, financials, the logic of private equity, and the video game landscape, removing Treasure Hunter is simply good for business. But as long as the players are sold the generous risk Jagex claims to be taking for the game's integrity, we remain more susceptible to the integrity tax, the borderline illegal removal of grandfathered rates, and the ever-increasing price of membership.
We probably won't maintain the revenue that we currently are when we make these changes. That's the truth. You know, some short-term pain is probably worth the restoration of the game if we can get to that point.